everyone. We are back on this afternoon of the Carbon Pricing Conference. If you just join us this morning, we have a great session on net zero target, net zero engagement, and net zero transparency. We have also discussed on the carbon pricing itself as the title of the conference, the difference between embedding public policies, incentivizing organization from also private and public, and the civil society. For this afternoon, we are going to drive the scheme in another angle. It will be dedicated to a great roundtable on the implementation of Paris Agreement within the international trade agreement. When we're going to deal with this, decided to highlight something which is very important in global commerce, which is the supply chain, the carbon footprint of the supply chain at an international level. Then before going deeper with also some key panelists, we would like to share with you the solution. As you know, within these 2 days, 2 and 3 June, it's only about roundtables. It's not only about keynotes. It's also about solutions we have to raise up. And for this, climate techs are very important to support. We are going to design a last session on the 3 June, which is the Climate Tech Awards, to highlight the best one from the early stage to support, to accelerate. But before going deeper in this roundtable, let's have a look on some startups, some key teams who's doing a lot to try to find a way to meet the net zero target with a startup mindset. So let's run it, and we're going to see the first 2 startups to highlight for you. Hi everyone, this is the next round for the pitch session for the Climate Tech Awards. Now this is your turn, around 8 applications. Listen them, they are going to raise up a new sustainability for net zero. Here we go for the first pitch session. Cheers. Just all on if you just come in this session of pitch session. Here we go.
80% of available agriculture land is dedicated to feed production for livestock. A third of fish catch ends up as feed.
We come across a lot of startups, but what sets Tebrito apart is that it encompasses the full food value chain, from field to fork. Circularity is inherent in the business model.
If we trust nature to guide us in better using readily available resources and combine this with our technological edge, we can solve this challenge. These mealworms, native in Swedish nature, can teach us how to convert biomass into high-quality protein and then give back what is essential for the soil to start the animal cycle. Mealworms are packed with proteins, fat, vitamins, and minerals. They are well suited for industrial farming. They have the same protein profile as beef, but just for a fraction of the carbon footprint and resources demand. As an additional benefit, mealworms in the very same process also deliver frass, a powerful organic fertilizer that has biostimulation properties and help regenerate our damaged soil.
We in FEDEX are constantly looking for alternatives that can help make this world a better place, a healthier place, if they were able to succeed at scale. We are proud to count Tebrito as one of our FEDEX successful innovators. Since September 2019, when they were selected independently by a panel of experts, we have seen them flourishing and are proud of their potential.
Combined effort with the Swedish University for Agriculture, Tebrito has uncovered a protein extraction process that results in a 90% protein pure extract. It has no taste, no color, and no smell. This is completely disruptive for the insect industry.
With population growth and producing more from less, new protein sources are rising high on the agenda. The processing of alternative proteins is therefore of great interest for the food and beverage industry.
Insect protein will jump the animal production stage and go directly from field to fork, and we will close back the loop by sending our fertilizer back to the field to restore the soils.
The potential is that Tebrito can use one of our byproducts, biosludge, as a substrate for feeding the worms. We also see an interesting potential to in return get frass from Tebrito as a natural fertilizer for our forest seedlings. And I think this business could be a very relevant contribution to meet the future demand for protein.
Skretting, the world's largest fish feed manufacturer, trusted us with a procurement letter of intent for industrial volumes. Like our larvae, we need help to grow faster. Join our community of partners and help Tebrito grow and develop a food production system in balance with our planet.
Yes, thanks for this first startup session. According to reinvent some applications, let's say different areas on climate techs will be highlighted here. We are going to go on the next round of the startup session and come back then on the next round tables. Yes, please. Amazing team. You've seen just behind me that you're going to do with your startup to make the world a new world, an amazing world, raising up your competencies with your teams, with your partners. Powered by the technology, here is now the next round for the pitch series 2. Cheers.
Co-founder of JUIN. And today I'm glad to be here to talk to you about something that really matters for us. The reason why I'm talking to you today is because it's getting hotter right here on Earth. Still water is getting scarce, ices are melting, and some species are totally disappearing. And because of the climate inertia, even if we become carbon neutral today, we still have to expect and to anticipate some bad consequences. And among all these bad consequences, today I want to focus on the natural disasters. Natural disasters are becoming more intense and more recurrent and appear in places where they didn't used to occur before. We have to face severe droughts, intense floods, and large typhoons and storms. But let's not talk about them today. Today I want to focus on the wildfires. But why the wildfires? Maybe because I come from the southeast of France, where a lot of wildfires occur during the summers. And I've been kind of traumatized by this. So the wildfires are what I want to capture your attention on today. Maybe you have heard about other wildfires in California, in Siberia, or in Australia. And you do know that they engender a huge destruction of the biodiversity. They destroy carbon sinks that are the forest and release huge amounts of CO2. And this amount was in 2019 about 1,690 megatons. And even if this number is still decreasing, we have to reduce it more quickly, being more ambitious. And after addressing this issue for months, as engineers and entrepreneurs, we decided to gather the energy and the ingenuity we had in order to contribute to the resolution of this global problem. Firstly, we decided to discuss with the local firefighters in order to understand everything about firefighting and to identify all the problems they have to face in the field. Firstly, there is a first problem about the ignition, the beginning of the wildfire, because most of the time, wildfires are detected too late by people like you and me who give bad information or not good enough. So the firefighters need to improve this early process. Then during the operations, the fighting, there is often a lack of information about the whole fire. And it's often difficult for the firefighters to coordinate for large scale fires, despite some aerial means. And after the wildfire, there is always a possibility of ignition close to hotspots that could create new wildfires. So a really useful solution would look like something that is able to detect automatically any fire or smoke, something that is able to provide a video live stream and relevant current data of the whole fire to help the firefighters in short-term decision making and long-term strategy, and something that would be able to detect any hotspots and reignition that will help the firefighters to put the fire out definitely. So with my co-founder, we brainstormed a lot in order to find a solution that will solve all of these concerns in the same time. And the base solution that came to us is the tethered button. Why the tethered button? Because first, it is able to fly for days without any interruption. Then it has low using cost because it doesn't require any fuel or any pilots. It is filled with helium that is totally safe, and it is totally silent also because it doesn't have any engine, so it doesn't disturb the wildlife in the air or on the ground. And the Helium's airship is meant to be easily transportable with a trailer, for example, at a relative small size, and it has to be easily deployable and usable to not waste any time for the firefighters, and it will be resilient in the environment where it will fly for hours or days. In brief, it has to be firefighter friendly and environmental friendly. And on top of that, it will feature performance visual and thermal cameras on board, combined with artificial intelligence to detect fire and smoke. And until now, we have already flown a first prototype with the local firefighters in order to understand how they could use it and what are the advantages and the drawbacks of such a solution. Now, let's talk about the business model. This business model is quite simple and usual, and we decided to sell the whole product for the firefighters as an asked by them. And this product will include the whole airship with the trailer to transport it easily. It will also include the software license to control the camera remotely with the artificial intelligence. And on the other side, Liam will provide some services like the mechanical maintenance, the helium refill, and we will also be able to bring some structural improvements on existing products. Now let's talk about our collaboration. The reason why we are talking to you is because we do think that a collaboration between Liam and the Climate Tech Venture would be profitable for everyone because we share the same vision of the way we have to fight climate change. So on the one hand, we could bring our determination and motivation to fight climate change, we could bring our ingenuity to find innovative solutions for today's challenges. We could bring our ability to make concrete solutions as soon as possible. And we could bring our strong environmental awareness that drives us every single working day. And on the other hand, the climate change venture could bring us financial support, what is necessary for us and our project. We could benefit from strategic advices for business and even environmental topics. They could bring us their global influence to upscale our solution and their experience to not make any mistake that could jeopardize our project. To conclude, for Lyon, the corporate culture is very, very essential for us. And the why of our company is crystal clear. We do want to reduce the number of wildfires by 30% by 2040. Even if this goal is quite ambitious, we do know that, but we also do think that it is feasible by continuously collaborating with the brave people who are the protectors of our forest, the firefighters. And to reach this goal, we also need to work with employees that are all driven by the same motivation and values and who are able to join their strengths to deal with the challenges we will have to face. And we have to welcome investors also who have a long-term vision like us and who are not afraid to be part of a journey aboard the Lyon airship. So, dear Earth inhabitants, we don't ask you to become firefighters, but to help us as reliable contributors. Thank you.
Yes, very interesting to
Je te mets l'antenne un instant, s'il te plaît. 1, 2, 3, t'as l'antenne.
Yes, very pleased to have those solutions highlighted. You have seen that it's not only save life for firemen, save life for people, it's all about save life for the environment. Environment is our common carbon, natural carbon sink, and we have to preserve it, and it's very important to have the solution highlighted. So we are going now to discuss in very few minutes about what climate techs are, and we are going to run after this the next panel in few minutes also dedicated to implementation of the Paris Agreement. If you just join this conference, depending on your time zone, feel free, if you are already registered, all the content, all the sessions who have been produced this morning from Paris time zone is going to be allowed in replay for those people, and you can catch also them on our Eventbrite website to have all the sessions in replay. So let's talk about climate techs. Climate techs are very important today. Climate techs are the new hub to reinvent the economy, the new hubs to reboot the technologies in the sense of the net zero, how can we say, model, the net zero era. And before going deeper on the solutions that we would like to address, it's all about, in fact, supporting the great teams. The great teams are powered by startups from different regions of the world, different countries. And if you just join this session dedicated to the pitch session, from all over the world, you have candidates to be highlighted. We have just shortly some few of you to say, even if you are on an early stage level, it's not a problem. We have to support the good one solutions. So we hope that with this in mind, we are going to support from the early stage to the next leaders for climate mitigation, the next leaders, industrial players. So now I'm going to be back with my panelists, and before introducing the panelists that we are going to host, I would like to have a smart introduction of the content of this panel. The content of this panel, it's not an easy one. Probably it's the most challenge when we talk about business. We used to say, let's say business as usual. But do we think that business should be as usual anymore when it comes to drive forces for sustainability? We have to invest without a direct return on investment in real time or in short time. The time relationship is very important. So from investors' perspective and for also the citizen consumer perspective, sustainability has to be well understood. Starting from the business point, it's all about, how can we say, our relationship of the time of the return on investment. So the relationship with the time on investment has to be think now in trade agreements. Let's talk about international trade agreement. This is not business as usual. This is difficult. This is tricky. You've seen on the last decades many newcomers in the global market. And the players, each player would like to take a piece of the global market. So when it comes with business as usual, it's not, in fact, a business as usual. It's much more than different and painful discussion between different geo-economic zones. People would like to have a great and flourish industries. People would like to have a better lifestyle. So it comes with raise up the company potential. To raise up the company potential, it is all about taking piece of market. So let's take the business at one hand, and let's bridge on the other hand the Paris Agreement. It's all about agreement, but when it comes with aligning the international trade agreement with the Paris Agreement itself, how can we fulfill all our, again, painful discussion to find some accords between geographic zones and to redesign now a new dialogue, a new sustainable dialogue, a new equilibrium. If we would like to implement the Paris Agreement, it's only about this, in fact. On this session, we are going to design the first layer of the topic and the second one. The second one is about how can we be sure to reinvent something new. When it comes by new business, it's also about a new backbone of the business. The backbone of the business is the supply chain. And on the second point, we are going to dedicate a discussion on how can we build a new circular economy with a low carbon supply chain. This is all about this specific session. And for this, I'm very pleased to welcome my distinguished speaker, also from this morning and this afternoon. You are from different experiences and different, of course, point of view, and to share how can we fulfill now a new, let's say, a new mindset first, and find the way of the technical point not only to share a good mindset and the same mindset, but on the technical point, there is the tricky zone. So let's challenge this with this round table specifically on. So I welcome a new panelist from this morning. I would like to have an highlight from Yin-Yang Liu, who is going to co-moderate with me this dialogue. Yin-Yang is from Brussels. She's based in Brussels, and she's got a great view on how can we say IP, brand, and also the business stuff in different geoeconomic zones. So let's run it by introducing yourself, please, Yin-Yang.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Hello, everyone. Nice to meet you. Actually, my name is Yin-Yang. I come from China. You can see my name, symbol like a Chinese symbol, yin and yang, to be balanced. So we talk about the balance today, how to drive the balance between the trade and environment. First of all, thank you very much, Fabrice, to invite me to participate in this panel. And also congratulations for this very important event. I think this is very important issues for the global world. We need to work together to tackle the climate issues. So I located in Brussels. Actually, I do the policy watch between the climate change and trade. And since I had an IP background, I used to in charge of the tech transfer between EU and China. So therefore, I strongly dedicate in encouraging green technology, IP licensing, and green tech transfer to tackle the climate issues. At the same time, I also assist NGO to working on the international environmental standards. And apart from that, actually, I'm a vegetarian, can be like a vegan for the past 10 years. So we talk about reducing the CO2 footprint. So I'm under pure and green lifestyle influencer. So that is about that is something a little bit about myself. Thank you very much, Fabrice.
Yes, thanks Yin-Yang for sharing your introduction and the background that you're going to provide in this discussion. I would like to turn now with Richard Ovid that we have discussed the link between this morning and this afternoon. Yes, for those who's going to join us directly on this session, Richard, could you present you briefly? Yes, please, Richard.
Well, good afternoon, good day to our global audience. I'm the former rapporteur on corporate responsibility for the European Parliament, responsible for the European non-financial reporting rules, through which 12,000 businesses have been reporting on sustainability for the first time and about to be updated. So these are very exciting moments. And I also went on to be the chief executive of the International Integrated Reporting Council, trying to bring together sustainability and financial reporting and to harmonise the different voluntary sustainability reporting frameworks, including starting with ensuring that each framework adopted the same approach to the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosure, TCFD, recommendations. And in this session, I certainly, as a former regulator, want to say that regulation has its part. We can't do everything to regulation, but it has its part. Certainly that can include banning certain products and services that are the most emitting. It involves removing fossil fuel subsidies. It involves tax reforms, and it involves new product and service standards, and it involves mandatory disclosure of the type that we were talking about this morning. But in this session this afternoon, I hope that we'll address the whole issue of carbon taxes and whether we can seek international agreements over carbon tax. I want to look at the whole issue of international trade agreements. As Fabrice, you've mentioned, so far, it's always been an anathema. It's been trade negotiators and governments behind them have always resisted having binding conditions on social and environmental factors in trade agreements. That's been limited to investors and investment. Will that change? Should that change? And I think this session is going to answer yes to that. And why that is either necessary or it will be forced is that governments, including the European Union itself, are likely to look at border taxes, the idea that products that are imported to a country from markets where there are not high standards of carbon reduction, where pledges have not been met, that there will be an attempt by governments to maintain competition for their own domestic industries by imposing tariffs or taxes. That's going to be hugely controversial within the World Trade Organization, but I predict it's going to be a big issue in the period ahead. So exciting times, and I believe that the European Union, which has always been at the forefront of pushing in climate negotiations from the Kyoto Protocol onwards, is going to retain and maintain that leadership role in the months and years ahead, and so it should.
Yes, thanks, Richard, for saying this. We are going to go directly in the raw material of your purpose. I would like also to welcome Paul Friswold from as EU Climate Ambassador. You mentioned, Richard, that there is, how can we say, a new dialogue on the geographic zone border to design. You mentioned the tax frontier or the carbon tax. Is it the next frontier of the issue? Paul, what is your point of view from an EU point of view, just linking also with Richard on the purpose? Please, Paul.
Thank you, Fabrice. Let me just point out that my title as Climate Action Ambassador is an honorary and symbolic title. It does not commit the EU. Nevertheless, as Richard pointed out, I fully subscribe to the fact that the European Union has been instrumental in ensuring the prolongation of the Kyoto Agreement until we were able to adopt the Paris Agreement. But you know what? There are two problems with the Paris Agreement. It is a fantastic agreement because all nations commit to a single goal of 1.5 degrees Celsius. But the problem is that it is not like the Kyoto Agreement was. It doesn't have a legal commitment and it doesn't have the same kind of instrument embedded in it. And so it is up to every country to find its road to Paris and to reach that. And as different regions of the world and different countries, as they embark upon that road to Paris, they will choose different options. Now, in the EU, for instance, we have since the Kyoto Agreement and already in 2005 implemented an emission trading scheme, which gives a price to carbon, which is indeed the core of this conference and why, and as I've said earlier, it is indeed the backbone of the European climate policy. And it had some infant challenges, but now, as has been remarked by many speakers, it has enabled a very high price of carbon. We are talking about above 50 euro per ton of carbon. Now, the thing is that from a climate perspective, this is indeed a success. But for industry who is faced with global competition, it poses a problem because the higher the price is, the higher the incentive to move out of the EU, and established industrial productions in countries with weaker or indeed no climate abatement policy becomes tempting. So we are discovering a victim of our success now that the price of the emission unit allowance goes above 50 euro. And that's where the European Union says, all right, so we have strong ambitions, we have a legal instrument, we are talking serious, and we want carbon emissions to have a cost. And that cost has now become so high that something must be done. We are very pleased, of course, that Biden was elected and that the US seemed to make a U-turn in terms of their climate policies. All credit to them. But we're also not naive in terms of how long. I mean, there's a presidential election in 4 years. So we pray to God that he will, or his party line will be continued. But we need to ensure that the EU does not become victim of its climate policy success. This is why the carbon border adjustment mechanism has entered the scene of climate policy. And obviously, it's very controversial. We mustn't forget when the EU tried to do a similar thing only for aviation. It tried to impose a carbon price for planes flying from outside of Europe into Europe. There was an uproar in Beijing, in Moscow, in Washington. There was a horrendous bill proposed in the Senate that threatened to cut every economic ties with Europe in the US Senate. And so, the EU got a bit burned on that one. Now they're trying to introduce emission trading to the maritime transport sector, which is faced with the same challenges. And so, this is we've got to get this right. And there is a balance to be found between not becoming protectionist, not disengaging in vital trade with developing countries that need to trade with Europe, the largest market in the world, for its own existence and indeed ability to grow out of poverty. But at the same time, Europe is facing social crisis, as we saw with the Gilets jaunes that you've been discussing today earlier, and the just transition whole scheme, that we must not let this climate effort become an elitist and only for the rich. We must ensure that it becomes an equitable exercise that benefits all citizens. And that's why we have to find some way that can ensure that companies, industries can no longer just leave the European Union, settle in a low income countries without any climate protection legislation, and trade freely under the umbrella of the WTO. And so, the cat is going to come out of the bag on the 14th of July again. That's when the Commission will reveal the contents of how they see this mechanism of a carbon adjustment mechanism will become very important. And I'll be glad to discuss that further with the panel, but I'll stop for now about the details of that. Over to you, Fabrice or Yingyan.
For sharing also these things that you put on also on the same level on the table. And this is also a great transition that I'm going to design for Miguel Naranjo from the United Nations. Do you think, Miguel, that not only there is a COVID effect today, who redesign the frontiers, the physical frontiers between people and between countries and between geographic zones? When it comes with the Paris Agreement, there is no frontiers for Paris Agreement. We have all to be obeyed. All the countries who have signed it have to apply it. So, do you think that the connection that it inspired me, Pal, with this is public policies within a geographic zone could be, by implementing the Paris Agreement, a new redesigning of the physical limit to come to one point to another point physically? Do you think that when we have to obey the Paris Agreement, probably, yes, Pal, if you would like to answer, or Miguel, that when we have to implement the Paris Agreement, in the same time, it's also about redesigning the frontiers of our physical capability to go from one point to another one. And it's going to fulfill new kind of policies in each national and regional levels. What do you think? It's an open question between, yes, Pal and Miguel, if you would like to add, to complete.
I'd like to pass the vote to Miguel, if he doesn't mind. I've already spoken, so I'll be curious to hear Miguel, and then I'll be glad to come back later on, Fabrice.
Okay, Miguel, what could be the overview on this topic? Paris Agreement, the implementation, and also probably a redefinition of not only the frontier of the topic, but the frontier, the physical frontier to apply Paris Agreement.
Thank you, Paul. Very kind to let me go first on this one. So thank you, Fabrice and Yingyan. Again, as I'm speaking from a position that represents the United Nations, so as you can imagine, I have to refer to the official process that we have in place to deal with these topics. I could also share my personal opinion on this, but let me follow the official procedure, right, or the official point of views. So in terms of the very direct question on, is the Paris Agreement going to change the geographical limits, the borders that we have today? In principle, no, that is not the case. The Paris Agreement is built on the commitment of parties, and parties are national governments, and each national government has its own sovereignty. So the Paris Agreement does not change at all and does not affect at all the sovereignty of each national government and of each nation to operate and to define their own policies and their own development. So no, the Paris Agreement has no provisions to change any national borders or physical borders at all. Now, within those borders, within those limits that nations currently recognize, and within the sovereignty of each government, may the Paris Agreement affect the way we see those borders? Then the answer probably is yes. The atmosphere, as we have been discussing, is a common good. The atmosphere knows no borders. The emissions that we produce affect anyone, no matter or regardless of the limits that we put on our countries. So one of the things that climate change, positive things, I would say, if we can say that climate change has anything positive, one of the positive things is that it is forcing us to recognize that we really need to work together and across borders to address this challenge. You have said already, it has been said already several times, it doesn't matter, or it's not a success if the EU becomes super sustainable or net zero greenhouse gas emissions if the rest of the world does not. And we are all going to suffer the consequences anyway, including the EU or whoever else takes action on climate. If the rest don't, we are all going to suffer the consequences. So the concept of borders in this case is less relevant than for other topics. It forces us to think beyond the traditional physical borders. Now, how or what measures exactly could be put in place or could change the way we see borders? Well, we just heard from Paul on this potential proposal that is coming up on carbon adjustments. We have been discussing about carbon pricing, and for it to be effective, it needs to be global, needs to be in some way proportional, at least proportionally applied across the world. If it's going to work, and it's not going to leave behind anyone, because again, we have to remember, we have to address climate change, but without leaving anyone behind. So that we have to be very careful how these policies are applied, so that we don't end up hurting, especially those that are in a more vulnerable position, while we're trying to do good. And so the trade-related aspects, as you know, the UN go under the UNWTO, the World Trade Organization. They are the ones who have the voice, the leading voice under the United Nations system for this topic. But indeed, thinking from a climate, only a climate perspective, exclusively from a climate perspective, definitely the concept of the physical borders changes a little bit. At least the way we treat them has to change. How we move people or goods and services across the border has to change. And maybe one of the things that, latest things that I think would be useful to do is to look at emissions based on consumption and not emissions based on production, which again may be something controversial, and it's something that, of course, parties, and from our point of view, parties, governments have to decide. But one of the potential ways to change the way we treat the borders today is you estimate your emissions based on what you're consuming, of the footprint of the products and services that you are buying, regardless of where they are being produced. Because this reflects a little bit better the responsibility of us who are purchasing, and doesn't put all the load, all the responsibility on the producer, whose life or livelihood depends from the production of those products or services. Yes, so I mean, so those are some initial ideas.
Miguel, for sharing. Thanks, Miguel, for sharing this this very huge aspect of the Paris Agreement, and how can we think not rebirth only in the post-COVID era, but rethink the way to deal with the carbon emissions from goods and products for people traveling. We would like also to have or to recover a good quality and lifestyle to meet people's family and friends all around the world. And when it comes with the implementation of the, you mentioned, Miguel, the part of the world where there is a production, and this part of the world could be a positive emitter of carbon, and there is a part of the world who are the consumer. There is other part of the world who are both the consumer and the emitter. The globalization is all about this. The history of the globalization since the different layer of industrial revolutions is all about this. I would like to have to stay with you, Miguel, just with one question, because you are part of United Nations, so you've got a global view. Let's talk about, in very few minutes, about Africa. Do you think that Africa has both a great challenge to raise up the lifestyle, but start with this, the quality of life for billions of people, and in the same time to be net zero? Do you think, Miguel, that we can design natively an interesting model for and from Africa for the world? What could be your input on this field?
Yes, the first part of the answer is definitely yes. We do need to support Africa. We will continue supporting Africa to ensure that the population there reaches a fair and good level of living. and this is part of the Sustainable Development Goals, right? No one behind. So definitely, there is a need to
we can't
them.
hear you well.
Yes.
I can wait. We can just.
Really good the sound.
I think that yes, the sound is better now. Yes, please.
Better now?
Yes, thanks.
Okay, great. So yes, I was saying that the first part of the answer to your question is yes. Africa needs to continue to have the support to bring all their population to a good level of living, right? As it's reflected in the Sustainable Development Goals, ensuring no poverty for everyone in the planet, and access to opportunities, water, energy, etc. So definitely, yes, we need to continue working, considering not only China, Africa, but everyone's special conditions, right? Particular conditions. Now, can we do that while moving towards net zero, while they move towards net zero as well? Well, I have to answer yes as well. We all need to make that transition, either if we are in a developed country or if we are in one of the least developed countries. We all need to move towards a global net zero. And now that move, that transformation, and I think we discussed this in the morning as well, will be different for each country. Those that have more resources and have been also, if we consider the concept of differentiated responsibilities, those that have contributed more to the climate change that we're living today, they must move faster. They must move at all speed possible. While others, which includes Africa as well, they will need to move there more slowly. They will need to, we need to allow them to transform more slowly and achieve net zero emissions later, probably later than the rest. So the answer to both, I would say, is yes. Yes, Africa needs to continue having this support, and every region or country according to their own circumstances as well. And the response or the movement towards net zero will be different depending on each country's and region reality.
Yes, thanks, Miguel, for yes, sharing your input on this. And I would like to connect now with Yin Yang. Within international trade agreement, there is also innovation. When it comes with net zero, there is also innovations. So how can we deal with, and let's stay and start with Africa. How can we deal, Yin Yang, on the common goal to be net zero and the innovation to push forward to be net zero? How can we deal with the IP on the technology transfer between countries and for, how can we say, regions where there is many infrastructure to build, there is a deep need of scalability of the innovation ecosystem. You know, there is one Silicon Valley, there is much more, several great innovation hubs in the world, in Asia also, but in Africa. How can we support a net zero model by the IP, by the green technologies that we need, by technology transfer to help also the continent? And let's start with this question, and the other part will be between all the countries themselves. How can we deal with those technology who support our common goal, but there is also IP behind? So it could be tricky. Yes, please.
Yes. Thank you, Fabrice. This is a very good question. I think if you look at a global, like a global value chain, they have different segmentation. For example, like an African country, as far as we know, they have rich, abundant of resources. So therefore, if you look at the value chain, they are on the beginning. So, so the value chain, the second one will be research and design. And the third one will be production and distribution and marketing, and then the sales. So in terms of African country, if we analysis from the global value chain, normally they focus on the natural resources input stage, means the first stage. So therefore, they might have risk. This will amplify the exposure of African country to the fluctuation in the price of commodities. So therefore, I mean, in a country who have much more technology resources, they have much more value addition, they can get much more diversified portfolio of exports. So therefore, we talk about the protectionist and competitiveness. Actually, because when a country have good technology, they protect the IP. Basically, IP, they got the patents. So patent is much more protect their market space. And many countries consider when they invest the money, do the R&D, and they also need to consider the investment in return. So in terms of like licensing the patents or transfer technology, they need to consider how to get the benefit. I think in this perspective, I think well, we need to encourage the company. I mean, on the global world, need to work together. For example, the country who have the science technology, means environmental science technology, which this kind of technology will include less pollution, more sustainable use of resources, and more recycling of the waste and products, and even handling the residue waste in a more environmental acceptable way. And who have those technology, encourage them to join the, for example, net zero coalition or like a net zero technology pool to work together, helping the country who doesn't have that much abundant industrial basis. So that is one thing. And second things, I think in terms of like a developing country, they should really participate in the value chain to understand the standardization of the developed country, because standard is very important. I think right now, many European countries try to just set out a standard, the CO2 emission standard, environmental standard. Actually, standard is very good. They can increase in the resources efficiency. They can also promote the greening global value chain. So therefore, the standardization on one hand can really drive whole the market, the global world, to a much more green economy, because many different stakeholders need to consider the certification requirement, and also consider the consumer might think about the specific labels when they buy some particular products. So this is a good perspective. But on the other hand, the standardization might bring the barriers for the developing country, for the market assets. So therefore, I think when you mention about the African country, the developing country, they should really, really try to participate in the value chain and try to learn what is the standardization, how can they educate their people, their workforce, and to join this kind of global initiative. That's what I think. And I also want to mention a little bit perspective of China, actually, because when you talk about, since I'm Chinese, I live in Europe, it's a very in a mixed background. So I think China, like this morning we talk about, China is a big country, big player in the CO2 emission. I mean, I have a lot of CO2 emission. Need to really work a lot to fulfill this kind of commitment. You can see in the past 3 decades, actually China really seized the opportunity of the trade So therefore, China is become the global manufacturing center. So in one hand, it's very good because many people become much more richer. So Chinese government in the last 3 decades, actually Chinese government really lift 500 million people out of extremely poverty. And also Chinese GDP, if you look at it, approximately 10% of per year growth. But however, and China really pay a high price for their environmental issues. Because if you look at the 3 perspectives, and in terms of the energy consumption, in China use more than 2.5 or 3 times higher of the energy and water consumption than the world on average. And secondly, if you look at the environmental pollution, if anyone have been into China, especially in Beijing, there's a lot of sandstone. So environmentally, especially air pollution, is a key problem in China, no matter in the east part of China, north part of China, or central part of China. And also in terms of environmental deterioration, and also soil erosion, this is really have a lot of huge impact. So on the water and agriculture. So, but however, you know what China do? I think after China joined the Paris Agreement, and China really work very hard to address these kind of environmental issues. Mm-hmm. And over time, China have heavily invested in the development of the renewable energy technology and equipment. So both for foreign market and also for the national deployment. So you can see nowadays we talk about the electric vehicle, right? So China really invests a lot of money on these. And also I can see right now many Chinese electric vehicle company already enter into the European market. I think that is also, on one hand, is quite good. Mm-hmm. We work very hard for this. Mm-hmm. And on the other hand, global world need to work together. Mm-hmm. Sure. In many perspectives. Mm-hmm. Yes, that's my sharing. Thank you.
Thanks, Yang. You have designed the 2 big pictures between Europe, also the 3, and you speak before on also Africa and now China. I would like to be back to Paul Frisvold on one or several points that you have stock pick in the discussion from Richard, from Miguel, and now from Yin Yang. You would like to add something, Paul?
Thank you, Fabrice. Well, I think that both Miguel and Yin Yang touched upon many very relevant issues and difficult issues, conflict areas. But I think there are 2 things that come to my mind when I listen to the debate. First of all is obviously the fact that we, as the developed world in Europe, which was very well put, that we don't solve the climate problem if Europe goes alone. That's true. But Europe has, I would say, and the United States for that matter, a moral responsibility. We were the ones who filled the atmosphere up with CO2. And we did so by growing into an extreme wealth. And if we are now to set limits to other regions' ability to grow out of poverty, then, that's historically, that's not fair in a way. So an example is when Norway, for instance, invests lots of public money into developing a commercial technology of capturing the CO2 emissions from industrial activities and fossil energy production. That is a way of saying, well, we take that responsibility because we have earned our fortune by selling a product that produces greenhouse gas, which destroys the atmosphere. So it's only fair that we should pay a larger share of that burden. So that's one thing. And obviously, if we can do that and make that technology cost competitive with other climate mitigation technologies, then we offer that to the world, and we should do so, not by protecting our markets, not by introducing harsh intellectual property limits, but really sharing that, because that technology will allow the other countries to use their abundant source of energy, which is for many countries fossil, unfortunately. So that's that's an example of what I think the OECD or the industrial countries should bear in mind, and we do that to a certain extent. On the other hand, let me just add, before I turn back the floor to the other speakers, I'd like to hear Richard's takes on this as well, is that, you know, technology development and markets, they don't come by themselves. I have been attending many UN COP meetings, climate negotiations, and seeing how small countries or individual countries, no matter if they're small or big, but individual countries have the ability to block agreements. And so the world needs first movers, and we mustn't inhibit the ability of first movers to go ahead, to put in place high prices for emitting carbon, to put in place standards which will allow for development of these technologies, for the cost reductions, for the market developments that will at one point benefit other countries and regions too. So again, there's a fine balance here, because if we all go in one pace, we will never get across the finishing line in time. So we have to allow some countries, regions, be the first movers to show the way, to lead the way, bearing in mind that we have to share technologies, we have to share our competence, our knowledge to the benefit of others, so we can bring them up to speed as well. I yield.
Yes, thanks, Pal, for also highlighting these points. I would like to address now to Richard Ovid, as you are very involved in EU and still connected also. How can we move at a global level model from low-cost production to a low-carbon production? And with this model, how can we put the good policies to create the jobs that we need? Not the jobs of yesterday. This is the old model. We need, and people in this hopefully post-COVID era have to find new sectors, new skills, and these new sectors and new skills could be a switch between the old and the new one. How can, on the public policy angle, we can design and to have the narration, the common narration, to say, there is a blue ocean in this field. Let's move this model with low-cost product to a better one for everyone, in fact. What could be your input in this area? Yes, please, Richard.
I agree very strongly with what Paul said about leadership being needed and welcoming initiatives in and around Europe. But of course, that leadership only works if it's successful. And the current mechanisms that we have in international trade have, over a number of decades, not given priority to multilateral environmental agreements over free trade. The environmental clauses have tended to be voluntary, whereas the investor clauses have been mandatory, enforced in investor dispute mechanisms, which have actually inhibited higher environmental regulations, including across the developing world. We do need to change that. We need to change that in bilateral trade agreements, and we need to challenge that within the WTO, although the European Commission claims that its current policies are consistent with the WTO, I foresee trade protection fights going on in the WTO unless we build consensus internationally behind that. And new trade agreements should recognise high environmental standards and non-regression clause. They should ensure that international environmental agreements are ratified and implemented, that there's respect for domestic environmental regulation and implementation of that regulation with monitoring, not just the words in agreements. There should be environmental principles in trade agreements in the same way we're talking about environmental principles in the reporting standards. And we should have prescriptive environmental conditions in trade agreements in the same language we have about economic trade, not with some form of second-class type requirements. Now, how does that, Fabrice, link to your question about the just transition, as I talked about this morning? How do we make sure that this doesn't end up as trade protectionism for the European Union and other richer regions of the world, and genuinely promotes the development part of sustainable development in poorer countries in the world? And I think that's about ensuring that a development rather than a sanctions model is applied to how we go forward in these agreements, bilateral and multilateral. And so that at each and every stage, there is incentivization for industries, for economies in developing countries to support sustainable models in terms of development, and that those agreements are negotiated with genuine reciprocity between Europe or developed countries with the developing countries themselves. And everyone knows this imbalance there is in the power, even in the negotiations between richer blocks and poorer blocks in the world. So it has to take account of that as well. And when we come on to the climate border adjustment measures that Paul and others were talking about earlier, that provides a very good case example of how this could be applied, so that, again, there is consultation with partners from the global south and not simply imposition from Europe or the global north. And to give great credit to the European Commission, the International Trade Committee last October, not simply should these climate border adjustment mechanisms be brought in, but the money that is generated from that should be shared with developing countries themselves and add to environmental finance to developing countries in the world. And we all know that at the moment, the richer parts of the world are very good at pledging climate finance to the developing world, but there's been a lot of double counting with development aid that would have gone in anyway, rather than genuine new money to help developing countries and their industries to develop in this low carbon way. Well, that would be a source of funding that could be could actually go to provide genuine additional money. And I hope that when the carbon border adjustment mechanism is passed, that it will include that clause of genuine new cash. Indeed, I hope that when it comes to Glasgow and the COP26 later this year, that we will see pledges that will reach the 100 billion funds of transfer from the richer world to the poorer world. And indeed, that is needed for us to realise our aims. I talked this morning, Fabrice, about the importance of just transition. And I think it was Paul again who repeated the warning to us all of the example of the Gilets jaunes, who shouldn't be criticised. These were ordinary working people who were being hit in their pockets by a genuinely motivated environmental measure, but where the social consequences hadn't been accounted for. And we have to make sure that we take ordinary workers, ordinary citizens, poorer segments of society with us if this is going to succeed. And that is about transferring taxation from labour to carbon. It's possible for governments to do this in an entirely tax neutral way. So they can't be simply accused from interests for pushing up taxation, but they can change the way that taxes are wrought in order to ensure that there is benefit for work and for labour intensive models, matching the environmental low carbon models, and do so by raising money through environmental taxes that are a disincentive to high carbon models. It is hard in practice, but those principles are good principles. And that issue of reciprocity and genuine additionality for developing countries, for the global north versus the global south, and real just transition so that individual families are going to be able to maintain livelihoods and well-being. These are necessary parts of us reaching a low carbon future. It's possible, but we're not doing it today.
Thanks, Richard, for push the limits of the discussion from the bottom line to the how can we say, the mechanism to implement it. And I'm just asking another question now, and to make the connection with you, Richard and Miguel. It's an open question for all the panel to close this very interesting and helpful session for everyone. Do you think, Miguel, at a United Nations point of view, you mentioned surely the Paris Agreement, we discuss about carbon or tax adjustment, we discuss about trade agreements, to have a fair, as you mentioned, Richard, a fair transition. What could be a universal carbon tax if there could have some raw material to implement it, and then it will be the work of each country, each government, each leaders to say, from my perspective, I can adjust by the two pieces of the governance. The first one is voluntary market and carbon credit and carbon market. And the other one, you mentioned it, the Gilets jaunes. This is a tax. Who's going to pay the tax? Who is going to pay the effort? Is it one sector, different sector? We're going to spread it on the end user, so the consumer, or everything of this? And it's the same question in each country. In fact, how can we raise up the idea of the implementation? Not the same universal carbon tax, but the framework to have a universal carbon tax framework to implement countries per countries. It could be tailor-made. It is an open draw, an open question for remarks. Who will be welcome. So let's talk about this, Miguel, and then closing the panel with my distinguished other one.
Thanks a lot, Fabrice. I think here I would like to hear first from Richard, who I think has more to say than me, and then I can help with some final remarks, if that's okay, Richard, with you.
I think it's for our moderator. You must decide, Fabrice.
Yes. Yes, it's open. It's open to you, in fact. It's like an open do tank. And yes, run it as you feel it.
Okay. So I think it's a great question. I know to you and to Isabel, our co-chairs for this conference, that is something that you want us to address, which is not just lofty ambitions, great goals, let's talk about 2050 and get excited, but actually what we do now to make the achievements of those goals possible by 2050. And if I can, I suspect this will be my closing contribution, if I can reflect one from this morning and one from this afternoon. from this morning, I want the COP26 to endorse science-based targets for business. This whole creation of standard setting in the field of environment, social and governance, just like financial reporting, by the way, is regulated, but then the standards come up through a voluntary process. And that's what is happening and will happen both in Europe and globally. But in order for that to be genuinely understood and applied and accepted, a standard is a standard because it's acceptable. I want the COP26 to be part of the recognition of the new standards that are on their way in Europe and globally. And that will massively increase the acceleration of the acceptance of the new standards and the way that they are not just created, but that they are implemented and respected. And as far as this afternoon is concerned, we've just been talking about the imbalance between the global north and the global south. I hope that the COP26 in Glasgow will give that extra funding that I've already referred to, but recognizing that many in developing countries actually don't trust us. They don't believe us in Europe and in the global north. They believe that this is a new protectionism. Many people believe that. So I think the COP26 has to prove to developing countries that we mean what we say. And I don't think that's just the pledges on climate finance, although I want to see them, as I've already said. I think it's about drawing up and agreeing strategies for climate adaptation and climate mitigation for countries who are the most vulnerable to climate change, the victims of climate change, the island nations, the countries with low coastal borders subject to sea rise, and to ensure that that money isn't promised for some arbitrary point in the future, but is agreed in Glasgow this year as part of practical strategies so that developing countries see that we mean what we say when we want to address this, not just as one country, not just as Europe, not just as the OECD, but as a world. And I believe that that is a principle that inspires all of us at this conference.
Thank you, Richard. And I jump in here, Fabrice, if it's okay. Thank you very much for that. Actually, yes, I could see Paul smiling when the question was being asked. And in my mind, I was just thinking maybe it is because he knows that it's a very difficult question for me to respond. In general, everything related to taxation and these commercial issues, from my point of view, from my position, it's better left in the fora that they correspond. And actually, Richard's response goes very much to the only comment I wanted to make. And it's precisely that in whatever solution we decide to put in place, either if it's some form of taxation on carbon or in any other form of making adjustments for carbon in the borders, and any other kind of response on climate has to be sensitive to the realities of each nation, of each country. And the solution that may be workable and very effective for Europe or for any given country, it is not necessarily the same effective solution in another one. And the point that Richard makes on finance is key. From our point of view, a lot of the success of COP26 is dependent on developed countries making good on their promise for finance. Only then will you see developing countries probably accepting other aspects that are still to be defined for the rules for implementation of the Paris Agreement during the negotiations. Should this finance not be forthcoming, there will be probably a lot of reticence from developing nations to engage, to move forward with all the other pending items. So it is indeed key to ensure this just transition and to ensure that trust is maintained in the climate negotiations, that the promise for financial support starts moving forward. It starts really being seen as a reality and not just a promise. So yes, I leave it there for now. And again, Fabrice and Yin and everyone, thank you so much for the opportunity to be with you today. I need to leave to the next commitment, if you excuse me. If there are any questions or anything else that is outstanding, please let me know, and I would be happy to respond offline afterwards.
Sure.
Thank you so much.
Sure, indeed. Thanks a lot, Miguel, for sharing your driving this session and sharing your point of view. And yes, keep in touch very, very soon. Thanks.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
I would like to close this panel by giving the floor to our other two panelists, just in very smart, probably, insight, in very 1 or 2 minutes. What could be your last remark on this topic between globalization, localization? What could be your, Pal, please, your input on it?
Thank you, Fabrice. At this point, I think that what was said by Richard and Miguel sort of sums it up. The fact that it has to be balanced, it has to be ethical, but it has to be efficient. And what Richard talked about, as I understood, about sustainable finance and providing a world standard for investors. And I was very pleased to read, for instance, that the head of the Bank of China has already committed the Chinese central bank to use the criteria for determining sustainable investment projects as the standard of the Bank of China. And this is a very encouraging signal, because it shows what we have been talking about, that there needs to be a global leadership. There needs to be front runners, and it needs to be an inspiring and efficient and equitable way that allows others to join in their own pace, but at least to benefit from the tools that, for instance, the European Union, but also other countries provide for the world. So thank you so much for inviting me. It's been a great pleasure to assist and to take part in this discussion. And Fabrice and Isabel, thank you for chairing this event. I look forward to meeting you soon, hopefully in Paris or other places.
Sure. Great. Thanks, Pal, for your feedback. Thanks a lot. I would like to have also Yin Yang for very short remarks in 1 or 2 minutes. Yes, please, Yin Yang. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Fabrice. Yes, I'm very happy to hear that Richard also mentioned the point very important. So in terms of a carbon tax, and that developed country should really try to use some resources to help developing country to make them see we are really acting instead of only saying. Then this is not about protectionism, and this is really want to involve. Every stakeholder in a global world work together for our generation and also for our next generation, our children, etc. So I think of, in brief, I just want to mention 3 points. First of all, I think every country need to develop their own appropriate regulatory framework for advancing sustainable trade and sustainable development. That's very important. And secondly, we need to have the adequate investment, no matter come from the public investment and also private investment, to support this initiative. And thirdly, it's about to join the international institution, like what we already mentioned, WTO, continue working on the like a global regulation, for example, like a global standardization, global indicators. In that case, we have examples. We are not only talk about it. And last is not least, I think we can begin to reducing the global carbon footprint we can begin to work from ourselves. For example, each individual, we can become vegetarian, right? So in this way, we can invite our friends and family to become vegetarian. In this way, we already take the practical action to tackle these CO2 emission. So at the end, thank you very much for all the panelists. It's a very inspiration conversation. I learned a lot. And also thank you for the Fabrice and also Isabelle for such an amazing event. Thank you.
Thanks, Yin Yang, for sharing this. And probably I've not mentioned that as a PAL, you are also ambassador, but in this case, the ambassador of the Carbon Pricing Conference. So you have drive also a background on this. Thanks for all our panelists. And I am going to give the floor to my co-chair, Isabelle, to close the discussion. And it's very important that there is a great understanding that the new framework is also bootstrapped by a new equilibrium, not from net zero, but the representation, the representative from boards to the panel, and to have a good gender balance. And I'm very pleased to share the floor with Isabelle, and yes, from Yin Yang to Isabelle, to let you conclude not only the session, but conclude the first day of the Carbon Pricing Conference. Please, Isabelle.
Thank you, Fabrice. So I am going to close the day one of the conference. I would like to thank all the outstanding speakers we had today, from this morning. We can see that there are shared views on the necessity to act now and deploy innovative technologies as soon as possible with the appropriate policies and financial tools and the right metrics and standards, while addressing also the social aspects, which are really important. So this will be difficult, very difficult. But there is a consciousness of the climate emergency everywhere now. So we have to work together, collectively, across borders to address the challenges. So let's all engage in our jobs to do our best, and as citizens too. Tomorrow we will start early. We will have a long day starting at 8:30 Paris time, and we will finish at 8 p.m. after the Climate Tech Awards. So I wish you a nice evening, or where you are, a nice time before we resume the conference tomorrow at 8:30 Paris time. Thank you very much for attending this first day of the conference. See you tomorrow. Bye-bye.
See you tomorrow. Bye.